Cool. Good morning, everyone. I think it's still morning. My name is Ben Cefalo. I'm one of the vice presidents of product at MongoDB, and I'm joined by George and Nimrod. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is George Gerchow, interim CISO at MongoDB and head of trust.
Nimrod Vax, co-founder of BigID. BigID provides visibility into organizational data for the purpose of protecting the data, complying with regulations, and for more value out of the data.
Great, thank you. So we're going to drive a little discussion here about the importance of customer trust inside the cybersecurity landscape. So, I'll start off with a question for both of you. In today's rapidly evolving cybersecurity landscape, what do you think the concept of customer trust is becoming such a critical element to the conversations that we're having into the businesses and our customers?
Well, I can start. As a startup, when we started, we had to deal with data and the proliferation of data. So, as everyone knows, kind of the cyber landscape the amount of breaches has only increased and continuing to increase, and data is kind of the target. Really, everything we do around cybersecurity is mostly around protecting the data. So naturally, this increases the scrutiny and the interest and the need for this trust between vendors and customers, right? Especially vendors that deal with data.
Yeah, I get asked all the time, like, what is the Office of Trust? And, thank you, Ben, because Ben and I established that at MongoDB, and it was a very unique concept because, as Nimrod was saying, there's three different buckets that we see things in. There's security events where, something interesting, you go check it out, and 99.9% of the time, it doesn't have a lot of impact. Then you have a security incident. And a security incident is something that you dig your way through, and then hopefully there's no exfiltration of data. And then the worst one of them all, which is a breach. And so seeing all of these different events, incidents, and breaches going on in the industry, over the last few years, so not picking on anyone, but whether it was Okta, Snowflake, it's just one after another, and we found that people want a different level of transparency. I mean, let's face it, these questionnaires that we've been answering and passing to each other for years are not working at all. It's just a big CYA. And so I think having these deeper conversations, having a hotline coming in to someone who's sitting in the seat and working their way through those three different particular items is critically important for customers.
So you mentioned the questionnaires. We're going to get to that in a second. But just to circle back to kind of both of what you were saying, how is the customers' expectations changed, and how is the trust program adapting to those expectations?
Yeah, I'll go first on that one. We had a security incident in December, only affected our corporate side. And one of the things that we found was customers were really hungry to figure out more of what we were doing from a security perspective. So none of our products were affected, but because we had a threat actor attack our environment, they just really wanted to understand more about our back-end security fabric. And we took it as an opportunity. So most people who buy MongoDB, leverage Atlas or Enterprise Advanced, security people only come in at the end of the sales cycle to send over those questionnaires, and they really wanted to get together and start talking about security from the beginning of the engagement all the way through and then continually moving forward. So we put together a trust advisory board within my first 9 months where we had some of our top customers, security people, come on site in New York, and it was a day of transparency. And I can tell you now, the trust that was built in that room, identifying where some of the risks potentially are, what we're doing about them, and then also them learning from us and some of the techniques and different things that we're doing, like across VDI, secure web browsing. It's just such a good peer-to-peer connection that I think customers really crave and want.
Yeah. We've gone through a similar process as well. Even as a small startup, when we started like 8 years ago, we identified that we needed to have a kind of a representative of the customer. So a customer advisory, not service, but representatives, right? And so even though we were fairly small, we immediately kind of hired a CISO, hired a chief privacy officer, and a chief data officer. Those are people that came from the industry that had a lot of credibility and could speak to the customer and explain what we do and how we do things, and also explain to us what the market needs and how they need. And this is consistent, not only in security but also in other kind of practices that we sell to, right? And that really created a lot of trust and credibility towards our product. And doing those product advisory councils really help build that. And even if it seems in early stages as an overkill, it served us greatly and was a very good investment for us.
You said something that was pretty critical that I think we should talk about a bit, which is people who have industry experience. I did a 9-year run at a cloud-native company called Sumo Logic, where I was the chief security officer and SVP of IT. And went through like a major security incident there before I left. We came out of it really well, but I was tired, and I was trying to think of like, what am I going to do next? And this idea of the Office of Trust was so attractive to come over to MongoDB and do, because I had this wealth of experience, and when I first started the company, I was kind of like a cybersecurity therapist, both internally and then externally with customers too. But you have to have that industry experience to be able to build something like this out, I believe. You just have to be able to check those boxes and have seen a thing or three through your career.
Right. So we talked a little bit about some incidents and some events. How important is now the supply chain aspect of this and the transparency layered into that supply chain?
Well, supply chain is a very loaded topic, I would say. But I can talk about the different elements, right? Even without talking about supply chain vulnerabilities or things like that, right? Transparency is probably the most important thing in creating trust, obviously. And whenever there's doubt about how much to communicate, over-communicate, right? Over-communicate because it only adds to the credibility of what you're saying. We're seeing that need for transparency across multiple stages in our development lifecycle, right? It starts with third-party vulnerabilities, right? Everybody uses open source and third-party solutions. And recently, obviously, as a result of some of those breaches, the scrutiny around those third-party vulnerabilities have become critical. And we found ourselves spending so much time just communicating and explaining some of those third-party vulnerabilities, because you get thousands of them, right? You want to keep the high severity and the medium severity out, but you're left with a lot of kind of mid-severity and low-severity vulnerabilities that either cannot be implemented or cannot be used, or you have cases where the third parties are not fixing them fast enough, and you have to get into a conversation with your customers to show what are the mitigating controls that you can put in place to overcome why those vulnerabilities maybe are not relevant. And that has become a very engaging kind of process for us, and I'm sure for a lot of others. There's a lot of kind of emerging startups that try to deal with that specific problem. So I would highlight that as probably the most significant aspect. Obviously, there's all of these questionnaires that you need to supply, which, yeah, they're a type of transparency tool, but as you said, it's not necessarily the most effective tool for real security.
Yeah, it's such an important subject, Ben. Thank you for asking that question, because even like NIST CSF 2.0 cybersecurity framework is now focusing part of their new metrics around two big subjects. One of them is supply chain, the other one is incident response. And you're only as strong as the weakest link in your environment when it comes to sensitive data. And that's why I love what you guys do, because if a vendor gets compromised, system gets compromised, or a person gets compromised, but they don't have access to critical data, I care, but I don't care as much. When they have access to critical data, and that's why it's all about the data, and then that's when I really care. And so, I think that we're moving, into this world of, more and more regulations coming out. Like we have DORA coming out of EMEA next year. Obviously, some things around AI, which we'll get into here in a second as well. But it's not enough all the time. I think that conversation that you were talking about, I think that's the important thing. Because if someone tells me like, hey, look, I got a SOC 2 ISO 27001, I'm like, that's great, and thank you for that, because I can get a lot of information. But what I'm really looking for is, like, where do you have some gaps that you're working on so that I can understand the risk, and then we can work together and make sure that we have a proper roadmap to get you to where you need to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's talk about questionnaires, because I always, you and I know, see a lot of them constantly. And I always can tell a customer's cloud journey, because question 2 is, what's the address of your data set? So how do we then start adjusting the customer's expectations with these questionnaires? Because it's just not going to be a scalable thing going forward.
It's such a tough subject, and just to give you some visibility, I mean, it was Chatham House Rules, our trust advisory board, but I will tell you, there was a lot of conversation around this because at MongoDB, we're taking a stance. Like, first off, we're not gonna sit here and just chase down all those questions anymore. If you can look at everything that we're providing you, whether it's bug bounty results, penetration testing results, all of our certifications and attestations, because I mean, we got a ton of them, whether it's FedRAMP or it's Italian public sector, 23301, like, we've invested heavily in a multi-million-dollar regulatory program. And so we're gonna self-serve a lot. We are very interested, though, if you see something that you go, hey, you know what? Like, I want to dig more into that, because that'll just make us better. But the other piece I want to mention, too, that goes beyond the questionnaires is we're not going to allow for customer audits. Like, it's such a weird thing for someone to want to come on site. I hate air quotes, but it's the only way I can describe it, because what's on site anymore? Like, these things are such a dramatic waste of time. I mean, you're pulling resources. We're going through 2 or 3 audits all the time at any given time anyway. And so, like, now we're gonna pull all these resources so that you can go out and do the same kind of inspection. And I mean it with the utmost respect. We've got to move beyond all this, because it's not working. Like, it's currently not working at all. And so we've got to figure out, like, how we get better, focus more on potential security gaps, because no one's 100% secure. There's always kind of that 80-20 rule. Let's focus on the 20. And where a company truly needs to get better.
Our experience is very similar. Obviously, we spend a lot of time answering those questionnaires, and that's the way today that you get certified and you get through the certification, and our customers demand it. We've had to provide some cases, the right for audit. Never did we have any request for any customer or ability for them to come in and audit anyway. But we are on the other side of those questionnaires. One of the capabilities or features that we provide in our product is to be able to perform privacy impact assessments and ROPA, record of processing activities, which are essentially questionnaires. And our approach to that is to really make it as easy as possible for the customers by automatically populating a lot of those answers automatically, by identifying similar questions so that the same answers might apply to those questions. I think there's a lot of opportunity there also from a technology perspective to make that process a lot smoother and more automated.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Ben, can I go there real quick?
Go for it. We were going to get there, but you can go for it.
So what you just brought up, you and I have discussed before, Nimrod, and it's, I definitely see a massive, we're going to talk about the risk of AI, but I'm actually kind of tired of talking about the risk of AI all the time, because I want to talk a lot about the advantages of AI. We built an internal bot that answers compliance and audit questions. We've been beating this thing up for months. And it has gotten very sophisticated, challenged a lot, and I see this industry going to a point to where, like, when we have an auditor come in on site, and it's public knowledge, our auditor is Shloman right now for most of what we do. When the auditor comes in, what I want to try to do this year is talk to the bot. Like, you're not even going to talk to a human. We'll have a human in the room, but anything that you're trying to audit, talk to the bot, get the results back, and let's see how far we can get in an audit, because that'll make the bot better. Eventually, what I want to see is the bot on a trust page, external. You have questions you want to ask, you go to the bot, and then the bot supplies all of that information from structured and unstructured data and gets it back to you. I really think that this is a major opportunity for us to be able to get some of the mundane, tedious task of checking the box by leveraging things like AI.
So, we were going to go a little there later, and you don't want to talk about the risks of AI, but I'm going to make you talk about the risks of AI. But also let's circle back to trust, right? So one of the big questions I always get is how do we use AI internally? What type of exposure you have? So how can you enable that trust conversation knowing that there's metadata or those answers are part of that AI bot, and how are you ensuring the trust there?
Yeah, so there are two levels of trust, and actually when you speak to customers about what are their concerns in adopting AI, it's about trust in the results of the AI and trust in the security of AI, right? Those two things. So I actually want to start with the trust in the results of AI. One of the key aspects of gaining trust in AI is providing explainability to the results you get from AI. Our platform uses a lot of AI for data classification, data discovery, finding similar or duplicate data, and so forth. And we use AI for that. And AI is a statistical tool, right? Even Gen AI is essentially, underneath has a statistical aspect to it. And so it's important to show two things. One, the certainty level, or how confident, the confidence level of the decision. And the other is maybe an explanation of how it came up with that result. So those are things that our customers asked us to do, and we've provided in the tool itself so that you could see get explainability around, and get trust in the results you get from the AI tool. So that's more of a functional requirement, not necessarily a security requirement. From a security perspective, the way kind of the industry is shaping itself in order to gain trust in AI from a security perspective, is following a lot of the principles of privacy and privacy compliance. So if you look at the EU AI Act, it follows a lot of the guidelines of GDPR, right? Which then became CCPA and CPRA in the US. And it's a lot about transparency. It's a lot about defining what is the purpose of processing for the AI, and then following up and making sure that this AI application is not going outside of those guardrails, right, of the purpose of processing. And so, the principles for that are, first of all, getting an inventory of all of your AI assets and being able to show where you have AI. And that's not only what's being managed in SageMaker, it's also what's being managed outside of SageMaker. And there are various ways of discovering that, whether it's scanning code and finding the use of libraries, or finding TensorFlow files on S3 buckets and things like that. So inventorying and visibility is important. The other aspect is being able to assess the risks. And there are various types of risks, but as a data company, we focus on data risks where you have sensitive data, and where you have regulated data, or where you're potentially violating licensing limitations or IP limitations and things like that. Being able to remediate those risks, data cleansing, DLP, blocking data from going out or coming out, and so forth. And finally, the kind of governance aspect of it. So being able to report on all of this stuff, right? Mapping it to frameworks. And NIST has a framework for AI and security, and OWASP Top 10. Those are kind of the most common frameworks mapped to. And unfortunately, that maps to a questionnaire eventually. At the end of the day,
It's always done.
But yeah, those are kind of the principles that we're seeing. And I just came out of a roadmap session with AWS to the ISVs partners, and they all talked about the unification of the new SageMaker that kind of folds in both the data catalog and the Bedrock functionality and the ETLs under one cover, but huge announcements, a very, very strong platform. all they talked about was about AI governance and how do you gain trust in what you're building in that framework. It's a top concern of our customers.
Yeah, I love that. I'm working it backwards. Governance, I think, is where it all starts. Like you said, taking a look to see, always making sure the results are correct, locking things down so you don't have prompt injections happen, as well. But the question that I always ask myself, and you and I talked about this the other morning, is entitlement. Like, that's the thing that scares me the most.
Yeah.
As we're getting more into this much needed world of enterprise search and starting to access so many different, like I said before, structured and unstructured data, are you entitled? So if Ben goes out and says salary, what's he gonna get back? Are we really gonna rely on the ACLs of every single one of those documents out there and role-based access and IDP solutions? Like, it's a really tough problem to solve. And so I think starting with a governance perspective first is probably gonna put you in the best spot. But for those of you in the audience that are thinking through this, entitlement to me is probably the biggest risk as AI starts to grow. And then the last thing I'll say about it too is it goes back to something that you said as well, which is transparency. I don't mind. I actually love it when someone gives credit to like next gen AI and say, hey, this was written with that or built. In fact, Ben was cracking me up. I'm gonna go watch it. He was telling me yesterday about a South Park episode that was written 100% using ChatGPT.
Well, I was thinking about that just a minute ago because I think we're going to get to the point with the questionnaires where like we answer the questionnaire with ChatGPT and then they get analyzed at the customer site with their own AI, and it's just going to be like the two AIs talking to each other.
Yeah, exactly. But I could appreciate the fact that at the end they're like, all of this was built off of next gen AI. I mean, that's all I need to know. So then that way I can understand some of the risks that may be associated with it. But it all comes back to transparency. Just be transparent about where you're using it, how you're using it, and then we can go from there.
Yep.
So you guys both kind of mentioned the governance aspect of it. So now that we have AI and we have these models, what about versioning and drift detection of these models, and how does that flow into the governance thought?
So one of the things that when I started talking about kind of inventorying the AI assets, a part of that is understanding what is the training data of those AI modules. What is the data that essentially, at least the way I see AI application, it's basically a data product. It's a transformation of the data. Garbage in, garbage out, but you need to know your garbage, right? So identifying the training data is critical, and the inputs that come in. And model drift would be caused either by messing around with the fine-tuning and injecting stuff into the prompts, if that's controlled through the prompt injection, or by messing around with the training data. So being able to identify the training data, making sure that the training data is secure, that it doesn't have excessive access to it or external access to it, and monitoring any changes is a kind of a critical aspect of security. And the remediation for that, is really around data access governance, right? Who needs to have access, removing excessive access, and tidying it up. And then monitoring, around who's accessing that data, any anomalies in that access. So that is, I believe, is the most effective way to control drift or more than versioning. I think versioning is important, right? But that's more of a kind of software management process to be able to roll back or fix. But you need to identify that there are changes and through that identify the risks. Yep.
Yeah, you described it really well. I think it's really important that training data and the steps that you take. So going back kind of to our GRC internal bot, we ran that thing in a test environment for a long time, because we wanted to measure for accuracy. We were also very much thinking through like what you were talking about, which is the controls that we're going to put in place when it accesses different kinds of data. We thought about entitlement, but it's like each individual step, there had to be like a cleaning of data, because that's what we were looking for, is how much garbage are we getting back? And then how can we eliminate that as it starts continually working its way through prod? And I think that that's the most important step. I'm with you. The versioning piece is a little bit different, but I always am concerned about drift, because anything in this world that's at a current state It's going to talk to humans, talk to machines, and it's going to change. It's
Yep.
going to shift or drift, depending on, like if you want it to change, which is going to be the shift, or if it just naturally changes, which is going to be the drift.
Right. We always have this dilemma of where do we want to cleanse the data, right? Do we want to cleanse the data and protect the data with the training data, which is very important, this is what comes in, or do we want to do it in the front end of the application at the prompt, when the data is coming out or into the prompt? Those are kind of the runtime or the design time, right? The shift left or right of AI security. There's also the aspect of the operational data in the vector DBs or in the models themselves, right? And that's where you can actually both. It's very effective to protect. It's there. You can connect. You know where the data is. You can scan those embeddings, whether inside the vector DBs or where the data is stored. And also apply security controls and through labels be able to control who has access to the data. At least that's the vision of how you control access in an AI application.
So we started talking a little bit about AI as more of a disruptor versus the risks of potential AI. So besides just handling questionnaires for us, what other ways do you think AI is going to help, like especially in the GRC space?
Well, I think, there's going to be a lot of examples in the GRC space and security space in general. Like one of the things, working for a security company for as long as I did is this whole idea of alert fatigue is still there when it comes to SIMs. You get alerts constantly that you got to dig into, and I can really start seeing AI like taking that first look of different alerts that you're getting and nope. Oh, that's interesting. And then starting to surface it up to the right analysts or responders. I think it's going to tremendously help out a SOC. Now, shifting hats a little bit and looking at more of the developer world, I also think that we're going to start being able to leverage AI to be able to shift from one application to another. And this is like my dream. To where you have something that's legacy in your environment, you want to move it to the cloud, but you never really understand truly the dependencies or when you're refactoring it. If I can leverage AI to tell me all of the dependencies, all of the users, all of the usefulness of that application, and then apply that to the design of either refactoring or building a new greenfield app, like that would just be massive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In general, like Gen AI is very good at doing mundane tasks at scale. Right, at reasonable reliability, right, with supervision.
Yeah.
And that is basically the definition of GRC, right? If you think about it, it's a lot of groundwork that you need to go, and you need to ask a lot of questions, and someone needs to supervise it. So I believe that Gen AI is going to disrupt the GRC space completely. 100%. And the proof of that is the app you guys built in-house, which probably saves a lot of time, right? And that's the direction I think GRC is going to move to. Some of the things that we've done in our GRC module is automatically identifying similar questions and similar answers. And then answering, allowing you to upload your documentation and your communications or internal kind of websites, and have the answers be answered, communicating with your chatbot, but then registering it in kind of a more traditional GRC way, so that it fits kind of the mold of what GRC people are expecting to see. So those things are, and to add to that, our mission at BigID is to give that data visibility, and a lot of those questions that are data-centric can be answered automatically, even without Gen AI, just by looking in or mapping that information out of the catalog. So yes, I think it has a potential of really transforming it. It's not going to replace the humans because you need supervision, but it definitely scales up and reduces the overhead and the errors that you will see in those questionnaires.
Yeah, I agree about the fact that this is where we all kind of want to be. Like one of my philosophies has always been automate yourself out of a job. Like as much as you possibly can, because anytime you can do that, you grow into something new. And so like now all of a sudden, I do think we're going to be in a world where some folks are just managing bots and managing AI, and making sure that, it's governed properly and it's giving the results it needs to and it's doing what it needs to. And then also constantly learning, which we haven't talked about as much as well. And so that's where I'd like to see a lot of these more mundane tasks go away from humans and then back into AI. But very quick question for you, because you mentioned something, and we touched on this at our panel earlier this week, but it was going to be controversial, so I want you to talk about it now if you don't mind. You know what I'm going to ask? Labeling.
Okay.
It was going to get heated.
So labeling. So labeling, first of all, based on NIST, you have to define sensitivity classification of all of your data assets, right? That's the foundation.
Totally.
Is it confidential, sensitive, public, whatever. And that makes also policy management much easier because you don't need to deal with a specific type of data. You just say, this type of data, these type of people have access to it, like Army style classification and access to data. So phase one, discover the data, classify it. And now you want to, through labeling, the industry has standardized using kind of labeling to automate and delegate the access controls to native systems, right? So for example, Microsoft Information Protection has labels on files. How does that help? It basically adds a metadata or some little tag to the file itself. Nobody can see it. But the DLP systems, the data protection systems, can read the file, read that label, and then take action, block or allow or restrict access based on that tag. And it makes the decision, the point, much more efficient, right? Doesn't have to calculate and rescan. It just looks at the tag. And the tag goes with the file. Same goes with databases, right? Databases have tags, and you can extended attributes, right? And some of the database activity monitoring tools and other can look at those tags and make quick decisions around it. That is the method that we use to delegate the remediation, so to speak, or the access control to the native access control of the system. And that's always the preference because you don't want to put a proxy in place or some kind of additional tool that will enforce access. You want to allow the tool to manage its own access using its native policies. And that's the most efficient way. As a CISO, you don't want to have to manage like 300 different systems. You want to have one place to define the policy, right? And that gives you that balance because you have one place to define your policy for sensitivity classification. And then this gets propagated out to the native systems, and with a very simple static policy of this role can see this sensitivity level, you can basically finish the job in terms of policy definition because the label will fall under the right sensitivity and would move around based on the sensitivity of the data without having to change the policy. That's kind of the...
Can I add to that a little bit?
Yes.
Because I love everything you're saying, and I was, no offense to our other panelists the other day, because you're exactly right. I want the policy to follow the data wherever it's at, whatever document. I believe the only way to do that is tagging, labeling to be able to make that happen. Because if you think about traditional DLP has failed in two areas. The first one is false positives, you know, and it's gotten better, getting past that. But the second is there's lack of context. Right. So like if Ben goes after like a certain piece of data, it'll flag it and say, okay, Ben is trying to get that data, but there's no real meat. Like I don't know if that's really like truly critical and sensitive data that he's trying to access. But if I can now have the policy live with that data throughout its entire life cycle, that is just game changing. And that's something that we've never really been able to do.
Right.
So all of that is game changing though, but it all comes down to how good the classification is.
100%.
Right? So how do you audit and validate the classification?
So you buy the right tool. But more seriously, it's very important that whatever tool you choose, allows you to validate the results. Take a look, sample, take a look at a finding and say, oh, is that really that finding? That ability to validate is important. Now, how do you do that at scale? So what we've seen our customers do is follow kind of the same traditional entitlement certification that is very mature in the identity management space, where every every year or every quarter, the manager attests the entitlements of their employees. So you delegate it to the organization. So each manager just has to review his 5 or 10 direct employees and attest that their entitlements are correct. So our customers are following the same practice for data classification, certification. So you can delegate the findings to the data owners, and the data owners can review. Obviously, it's slightly different scale because the data owner may need to review thousands of files, but they don't have to, depending on the trust they have in the system, they can sample and review a few of them and then attest or certify the entire. So it's kind of an operational flow that we've added, and some solutions have added into. It can be done either natively or in your ticketing, through your ticketing system. Some of the IAM vendors are now starting to try to do the same thing and combine also data certification inside their entitlement certification process. So.
Yeah, you're right. It's all about the tool, and it's like there's more to get there right now because we've tried before. Like I can remember, since we're at an AWS conference, why not talk about this? But if we go back to like the S3 data leakage problems that were around a few years ago, which really got people thinking a lot more about the shared responsibility model, AWS had released Macy right after that.
Yeah.
And when they released Macy, it was like, okay, they're trying to do data classification, but again, it didn't have a lot of intelligence behind it. And so like now what I'm starting to see through yourself and other vendors as well is leveraging AI to solve a lot of that problem is going to be so important. Because like you said, like I can do manual samplings if I have thousands of data sets that I own, but if I can start leveraging and trusting AI a bit more, that's gonna be extremely useful. But the advice I'll give is like start small and start slow. We're going down this whole path of enterprise search right now, and it's terrifying. But we're going really small and really slow because the risk in my mind is not so much the AI part of it. It's more of now I'm centralizing everything that is going to be sensitive potentially. And so
making it easier to discover.
Easier. And so like by starting slow, because of course, vendors typically, and we're a vendor too, and we do this as well, but they're gonna try to say, hey, let's just get it all done. In the beginning, let's get enterprise search attached to G Drive, and then let's go to Slack, and then let's go to Salesforce. It's like, just pause. Take these big pauses to make sure that everything is accurately working and that you're doing the level of inspection that Nimrod's talking about before you truly start expanding. I like to move fast, but in this area, I think you got to move a little bit slower.
Yeah, I agree. And enterprise search is a great example. People, the most common, at least that I hear of, is Microsoft Copilot. Not to mention the name here in this conference, but the same principles apply, right? We talked about labeling. So, first of all, make sure that you don't have over-provisioned access to data, right? Sensitive data, that you don't have excessive access to sensitive information in your organization. Apply data access governance practices and tooling. Labeling, label the data based on sensitivity. That allows Microsoft or any other native tool to control access natively, automatically, to that sensitive information. And that's really one of the reasons why it's so important. And then duplicate data, right? Duplicate data is duplicate risk. Get rid of duplicate data before you start giving so much access to your data, because sometimes you have the right controls on the latest version of that file, but you have like 300 other copies that are laying around somewhere for years that still have that sensitive information, but you don't know where it is, right?
I think another paradigm too is what we don't talk about a lot in this classification story is maybe this piece of data alone is fine and that piece of data alone is fine, but if they're ever combined, it's not.
100%.
And understanding that mind map of how we could classify that.
100%. There's no doubt. It's like identity.
Yeah, right.
If you got one piece of it, okay. But if you start putting together multiple pieces of it, that's where you get in
segregation of duties, right?
Yeah, for sure. But this reminds me of the conversations we were having about backups. This data dupe problem is massive, and we do it in the enterprise, and we do it in our personal lives. Like if you look at your phone, even though almost every single phone vendor out there gives you the capability to get rid of duplicate pictures or duplicate contacts, we're afraid to.
Right.
We just carry more and more data, and data exhaust is like a real thing across the board. And I think that that's where we get in trouble, is the residuals of things that we hang on to, and then next thing you know, we don't know where it's all at. Right? Because it's absolutely everywhere. So that's the thing that terrifies me.
Well, no one talks about right to be forgotten and who's going to Iron Mountain to get the piece of data out of the tape that is sitting somewhere, right? Like, so how real is it actually?
100%, right? It's always about the cloud provider, or the cloud solution to go get it out of there, which is interesting. But the conversation we were having yesterday was a really good one about why do certain regulatory standards have you hang on to data for so long?
It's regulatory capture. I'm telling you.
100%. You said that too, and it's so funny, but stop and think about that for a minute, whether it's a 7-year requirement, or a 13-month requirement. Why?
Yeah.
We're starting to really think about that a bit more. It just doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing to be able to keep, am I really gonna go back 7 years? Technology changes so fast in that time period that it just doesn't make sense. So I'm trying to wrap my brain around why we still do that.
Yeah, well, most customers of ours don't delete any data, ever, right? That's kind of that's how the industry operates. And I remember we had a conversation with a customer, and they told us, oh, we have data from the 90s that we have to delete. And I said, why do you want to delete data from the 90s? Such a beautiful period of time, right? All of the best music came out in the 90s, and you're gonna delete all of that. But you have to, right? It's just risk, and it's so there is the technology to be able to handle it, right? Once you have full inventory of your data, you can start identifying and putting in rules in place that identify data that hasn't changed in a long period of time. Identifying data of employees that haven't been working for the company for over, 2 years. Identifying data of customers that haven't been active for over 7 years. Even if you follow the regulations, you still have so much data that you can delete that the organizations are just not deleting for various reasons. And it's also, from an AI perspective, it's obsolete data. It's not necessarily going to help you.
No.
Data from the 90s might not be relevant for your bot right now.
It actually can skew it in the wrong direction.
100%.
Yeah.
That's what I'm afraid of too.
Well, before we open it up for questions from the audience, any last parting words?
Yeah, I want to kind of go back to, rounding it all. A lot of good conversation, talked a lot about the trust factor today. I do want to just lean in a little bit to that transparency piece. I love it when, going back to third-party supply chain, when people are like, yeah, we don't have everything under MFA yet. There's just these certain parts. I'm just like, thank you. Thank you for saying it, and thank you for showing me the progress and everything else. But it's a two-way street, I think, between cloud service providers like ourselves and then our customers. We got to be able to trust our customers too. And going to a cloud service provider and saying, hey, can I watch you log into your AWS console? The answer is always going to be no. There's just, you wouldn't want that to come, for us to allow a bunch of customers to take actions like that, because then it increases that level of risk. And so if you walk out of here with one thing today, really it's going to be transparency, and trust is a two-way street for sure.
Yeah. I'm going to actually steal your line for the summary, and basically agree that people are over-focused on the risks around AI from a security perspective, but I think Gen AI is going to bring so much more opportunities for better efficiency, accuracy in solving and scale in solving for security. That we're immediately going to see this working. We talked about the GRC aspect, fatigue, alert fatigue that goes away, explainability of alerts, right? Instead of going through millions of rows of data, you can get a summary very quickly and get to a quick decision. Even being able to reason conversations and understand drift, or discover drift, discover off-topic conversation, discover injection into the prompt. All of this can be done today so much easily with other LLMs, with other prompts. And you don't need to be a data scientist to do that. So all that brings a lot of opportunities.
It's such a beautiful thing when you think about the fact that someone has the mind, wants to ask the question and has the right question to ask, but doesn't have development skills. But then now we're starting to see that capability in human natural language to ask a question and have development take place to be able to get the response. It's pretty phenomenal,
Yeah.
To where we've gotten.
Definitely.
All right.
All right, sounds good. Thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, really appreciate you. Have a great show. Thank you so much.